I must start by saying that Putin is one of the best leader of our generation. Whether you like him or you hate him, you at least have to give him the fact that he's the best diplomat of this generation, right? Now, as most of us know, he gave his answer to the ceasefire of 30 days. Now, here's what he said.
In Kursk, the situation is fully under our control. The group that invaded our territory is in complete isolation. In these circumstances, it seems reasonable for the Ukrainian side to seek a ceasefire for at least 30 days. And we are in favor of it, but there are nuances. What do they consist of? First, what are we going to do about this incursion in the Kursk region? If we hold hostilities for 30 days, what does that mean? Does it mean that everyone there will be able to leave without a fight? Are we supposed to let them go after they have committed numerous crimes against civilians? How will the capitulation of the Ukrainian leadership be carried out? How will that happen? It's unclear. And how will other issues along the entire contact line be resolved? It's almost 2,000 kilometers. As you know, Russian troops are advancing on practically all sections of the front line, creating conditions for blocking entire, quite large units. How will these 30 days be used? Will forced mobilization continue in Ukraine? Will weapons continue to be supplied? Will newly mobilized units receive training, or will none of this happen? Then the question rises, who will control this? And how will this be verified? How can we guarantee that this will not happen? How will this control be organized?
When the West thought they already cornered him, he comes up with one of the best answers that many of us wouldn't have even thought about. The question here is, why is it that Putin is taking this position? Before we get to that, we need to first understand the leverage that the United States think they have on Russia. And for us to know that, we need to go back to NATO. NATO started in 1949. The United States came out the strongest country after World War II. So they took 11 countries and they started NATO. The reason for NATO was basically, number one, the United States wanted to control European countries because they invested a lot of money to save Europe from, World War II. And number two, it was also to avoid any sort of threat to the United States or any wars within, Europe, because Europe was buying a lot of US's goods. NATO was very important also because the industry that got us out of this war was the military-industrial complex. So if you say, well, there's not going to be any more wars, that means that you have to shut the doors of the arm industry. And so the military-industrial complex needed to make sure that there are always a conflict so that they can continue to make their money. Those are the main reasons why the US started NATO. Basically, they wanted to control and, of course, make money. For that, we need to have more wars. Now, the biggest success of NATO is the fall of the Soviet Union in 1991. When the Soviet Union falls, from that moment on, everybody respects the United States, right? NATO is really the United States. Many people have said, oh, well, NATO is a defensive alliance. Not really. NATO is an alliance that is there to make sure that the military-industrial complex does not die. Therefore, what they do is covert missions to start wars, sell weapons, and of course, dominate the world. It's very important for them to be dominant everywhere. The biggest mistake of NATO was to start the Ukraine conflict. Like I said in my previous videos, the United States with NATO started the Ukraine conflict in 2014 when they overthrew the elected government of Viktor Yanukovych. From that moment, Russia decided, I will not allow NATO to come to Ukraine, because if they come to Ukraine and they take, for example, Crimea, they can install nuclear weapons right at the doorstep of Russia. That is why Russia reacted. That mistake made it so that now the world can evaluate the strength of NATO. Now, the world sees NATO acting in Ukraine, and they're like, NATO is not that strong. Because if NATO was strong, right, with everything they did in Ukraine, from, attacking Russia's economy and giving all the weapons, intelligence, and everything, they would have already brought Russia down. But NATO is not what we thought it was. Just think about it for a minute. Today, Iran is able to shoot missiles to Israel. 10 years ago, we couldn't have thought of that. This is because they're no longer scared of the United States. What makes people bold enough to say today that, oh, now we're not scared of fighting the United States anymore? We saw the Yemen shooting missiles to a U.S. Ship and plane. They even brought down a U.S. Air fighter, and the U.S. claimed that they accidentally shot their own jet, right? Because it was so embarrassing to say it was, that the Yemen did it, right? And then in terms of weapons, we see Russia having hypersonic weapons that NATO doesn't have. By the United States getting involved in this conflict in Ukraine, it shows that they are not as strong as people thought they were. And when we come back to what is going on today, one of the reasons why Vladimir Putin, he's saying publicly that yes, the idea is good. However, we cannot accept the ceasefire right now because there are too many questions to answer. The reason why Putin is taking that decision is because he doesn't want to humiliate Trump. And Trump made some threats. He said, well, if Russia does not accept it, then we will put some sanctions. I already talked about sanctions before. I said, look, you cannot sanction Russia anymore because the first time you did it, it didn't work. It's not going to work. Now, when it comes in terms of giving weapons, because people are saying, well, if Putin does not accept it, then we will send more weapons. For that, the U.S. can no longer bring down Russia the way that he brought down the Soviet Union. So while Putin can say, look, this is a great idea, just because he doesn't want to humiliate Trump, Russia can refuse the 30 days ceasefire because they are confident that NATO has already exposed their strength and is not what many people thought it was. And this is why we can confirm today that in terms of leverage, we've been through that for the last 3 years. It is not going to change anything. The US does not have any leverage on Russia.